6. Meanwhile, the governor wants to reduce the state's prison budget, and he's calling for big changes in Michigan's criminal justice system. Fewer people sent to prison, more offenders set up with mental health treatment. He's also recommending job training for inmates before they are released. And right now, the state has more than 43,000 prisoners, and the prison budget is $2 billion a year, or roughly 20% of the state's general budget. Even though Snyder wants to reduce the prison population, he says public safety should remain of the utmost concern. And I think that is what maybe the debate has been for so long, that you don't want to be perceived, Nolan, as someone who's easy on crime and not protecting the victims. But yet we have a crisis here in Michigan in terms of how much money that we're spending on our corrections. And we still have some of the most violent cities in the country. And we have so many people who are incarcerated.
So we've been spending this $2 billion a year. Locking up more people than our neighboring states for longer periods of time, and it hasn't paid a return in safer communities. We really I think I commend the governor on this initiative because it's overdue. You've got a lot of folks on both the right and the left pushing for this sort of reform, pushing for an examination of who we lock up and why and for how long. Pat Caruso, the old prison corrections director, said we've got to decide, who we're afraid of and who we're mad at, and make sure we're locking up the people who are a danger, who present a threat to life and property, and maybe doing something else with the people who we're simply angry with or need some sort of punishment, done something they need to pay for, but maybe it's not 20, 30 years sitting in prison at a cost of 35 grand a year each. There's a nonprofit group, CAPS, that will release a report early next month to reduce the prison population by 20% through sentencing reform and save $250 million. Well, there's some road money if you can pull off that savings.
All right, so Stephen, there's so much to this that the governor laid out, everything from sentencing reform to taking a look at police forces and the racial makeup of a lot of police officers in this state. And so this is really a wide range policy initiative. What stuck out to you in this?
Well, I mean, what sticks out to me about the corrections problem is that we have a very strange system in Michigan where it takes a really long time for you to get to prison in the first place. I mean, you can, in most jurisdictions, you're committing crimes more than one time before they send you. But once they send you, you go for a really long time. I mean, longer than you would in another state, and you serve more of your sentence than you would in these other states. And so you've got this weird sort of problem on both ends, one on the front end and one on the back end. Both have to do with money, but both also have to do with public safety. Some people probably should go to prison a little earlier than they do right now in Michigan. Other people probably shouldn't go at all. But on the back end, everybody should probably serve less time. And so it's a complicated issue to talk to people about, or to get people to sort of rally around a central point, because it is so complicated, and we've made such a mess.
And you're already getting pushback now from the sheriffs and the law and order folks, and nobody really wants to sit down here and take a rational look at whether or not there are people in prison who are no longer a threat. I mean, there's plenty of studies say that after age 50, the recidivism rate drops way down.
Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't have so many post-50-year-old people in our prisons if they've been there for a long time. We've got a perverse incentive in Michigan to send people to prison instead of keeping them in the county jail, because if they stay in the county jail, that's on the local budget,
right,
and these counties can't afford it. Well, that's not a good way to make corrections policy. And I think the key point here is trying to keep people who've been to prison from coming back. 30% of the people in our prisons are there for parole and probation violations. If you could cut that down to zero, or even cut it in half, you've saved a good chunk of money.
Two things that stuck out to me when he announced this plan was talking about juvenile offenders and maybe making sure that they serve some time out at home as opposed to putting them in the adult corrections facilities. And the second thing that stood out to me was trying to get prisoners more into using the mental health program through the state. 20% of the Michigan prison population is already getting some kind of mental health services through the corrections, and you have to know that there are many more prisoners who have some kind of mental health issue.
That's a whole other dimension of this problem. When we gutted the state's mental health infrastructure, that population went to the prisons. I mean, that's who was in prison in a lot of cases, the people who just have serious mental issues, and there is no other place in the system to deal with them unless they are wealthy, unless they are privately able to pay for treatment. I think if you're going to really fix corrections, you have to start looking at what part of that infrastructure we need to rebuild for mental health as well.
Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely true. We're running mental hospitals and nursing homes out of our prisons, and that's very, very costly. I don't know that it has anything at all to do with public safety. You know, I think this is a more than past time to take a look at corrections in the state. We've known we've been overly harsh with our sentences. We don't have good time here, which really makes prisons harder to manage because there's no incentive for these folks to behave themselves. They achieve their minimum. We don't let them go, even if there's no reason not to. We've got to be more sensible here.
Real quick, before we leave this topic, Stephen, I want to ask you, the governor also talked about, making sure that a lot of people get jobs when they get released from prison, and that possibly is the toughest thing. I mean, how many businesses you think will be able to step forward to, help to try to retrain or interview them while they're still in prison so they know that when they get out, they have jobs? Is that the toughest angle here?
Well, it's one of them. I mean, that's a huge disincentive for people coming out of prison is the fact that they cannot get work, and a lot of places that hire have that little box that you got to check. Are you a convicted felon? And that means no work. I have sensed that the business community has started to turn the corner on that, and at least in Southeast Michigan, you have a lot of businesses talking about, okay, well, are there ways that we can relax that requirement? Are there ways that we can look at this differently? Because it's part of opportunity, it's part of public safety, and it is part of the economy. I mean, you've got an awful lot of people out of work because they have felonies.
Last word on this,
We've got to shield those employers from liability. A lot of them are afraid to hire somebody because if they hire somebody and they go off the dock again and do something, then the employers are worried they can be sued. So we've got to figure out how to shield these employers from liability.